Thank you everyone for joining for our webinar on GitOps with GitLab, the bigger picture. I'm going to hand you over to our speakers today and they can introduce themselves.
My name is Rasmus Praestholm. I'm a principal DevOps consultant with Adaptavist, where I just do all the nerdy DevOps things you can think of.
And hi, my name's Stephen Walters, and I'm GitLab Field CTO within the EMEA region. Really happy to be here today speaking about GitOps and with GitLab. Rasmus, do you want to take discuss with people, let them know what they're going to be hearing today?
Sure. So we're going to likely be covering what GitOps is and diving a little bit more into the different elements of it. I mean, what makes it tick and all the good things like that, how it usually flows, and sort of what's uniquely beneficial in GitLab or whatnot to make it work better with GitOps and enable you to do better things.
And I think it's interesting for us just to set the tone of the conversation that we'll be having, to get a bit of feedback from our audience. So early days, so I hope you're all awake. We're just going to make sure that you all are. We're just going to put a poll question out there. We want to understand who is currently practicing GitOps and to what kind of level that you are. Please click away. I mean, I could say on here where I think we're going to go, but I don't want to, predict or sway the poll results that we're going to get from here. But any thoughts yourself there, Rasmus, on what you think is going to come out from this?
So it's still a new topic, and it's also a very vague topic. It doesn't really have to be. There is a very concrete, definite definition of GitOps the way it was originally born, but that's not necessarily, what everybody nowadays thinks is GitOps. So I think this question is, even if you think you're using GitOps, that's fine. So let's see.
I think it's also going to be interesting because it's, as you say, it's the evolution almost of GitOps. What we thought GitOps was, a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, has potentially changed over time and is probably going to be very different again a year from now, 3 years from now, and 5 years from now. So it'll be interesting to see what people think, where they are, and so on in their journey.
Mm-hmm. And the results do seem, yeah, okay, that sounds about right.
I'm especially interested in anybody who says we're fully hooked in with the magic happening.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that is still a rarity for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So the results. Oh, now then. Now, what do you make of that, Rasmus? That's interesting. That is very interesting, actually.
It's very new. I mean, it is and has been out there for a few years now, but it may also come back to, the ones already doing GitOps might not be needing more webinars on it. So they just might not be here. Where it says still new to the topic and related, an interesting question I'm going to put to you here. I mean, it's probably going to be just as interesting if we could get this from our audience, and maybe we will later in some of the Q&A. But is this simply because it is a new topic and people need to understand what it is, or is it that they've got an understanding and not quite sure where to start? And it could also be that is it something that's out there, but you just haven't had time to really get into it yet. And sometimes you jump on a thing like this to just stay atop on, hey, how is it looking these days?
Mm-hmm. So I'll tell you what, let's help that out a little bit with, that maybe understanding a bit more about what GitOps is for those who want to understand what it is, to help them to get involved. And maybe we can give a few hints and tips along the way about what's the best way to maybe get involved and to get started with this. So around what GitOps is, I mean, you mentioned earlier, Rasmus, there's a pretty standard definition out there, and I'm going to read the standard definition that we GitLab give about this. What is GitOps? Well, GitOps is an operational framework that takes DevOps best practices used for application development, such as version control, collaboration, compliance, and CI/CD tooling, and applies them to infrastructure automation. Or simply put,
GitOps is the application of DevOps best practices to the management and automation of your infrastructure. Now, a bit wordy maybe, and actually potentially a bit simplified really as to what GitOps is, because there are multiple aspects there that we spoke about: version control, collaboration, compliance, and the CI/CD tooling. And I think that is summed up nicely in this slide that we're seeing here, where we're talking about probably three key elements around GitOps. It's around that codification, in other words, infrastructure as code, which covers around, the storing of these things under a Git version control repository so that we can quickly version control these, and having code which describes a particular desired state. It's about that collaboration. So in other words, how we bring these things together, having those merge requests, implementing changes, having the main branch and having your trunks and your branches within there, and applying to that code review. So, we're now talking about infrastructure, where we can review that infrastructure, we can collaborate on any changes that we need within there, and go through a review and approval process actually on those. And then finally into that automation, so reconciling that, using things like the agent for Kubernetes. And I know, Rasmus, you really want to delve into that, and I'm going to give you some time on that one. The automated updates as well, and the instant feedback. Now that talks about what is GitOps. Something else I would like to go into more is about why GitOps. Why GitOps is important, because if you're going to understand what you're going to implement, it's useful to understand why you're actually doing it. So, I mean, I'll hand to you, Rasmus, here, your thoughts around this, about why GitOps is so important.
Yep, and it is, and comes back to how there are already multiple different definitions of it. So, whether or not it's specific to infrastructure or releases, whether it's meant to be specifically tied to particular environments, pull, push, all those things. I think ultimately the really important part, because a lot of people, teams have been using DevOps and infrastructure as code and CD and so on to do most of these things already. Some of them even have a similar way of having manifests in Git and talking about them in pull requests and so on, and then they're done. But there might be the subtle difference that whenever you're done collaborating and you say merge it, it's okay, it's ready to go, then it might be triggering a CD pipeline that goes and deploys things, which is sort of distinctly not GitOps as per the most true or original definition of it, where you really need for there to be an operator involved that's sitting outside the tooling that actually builds stuff and tests merge requests, pull requests, and then ultimately just pulls in the change. That's the push versus pull. And depending on what definition you go on, GitOps may require pull, but at the same time, it's a spectrum really of where you go from, well, we want to specifically just say it's about having manifests on Git, having people collaborate and test things, and then have a pull thing, go deploy, done. That's all it is. Versus it's the next flavor of DevOps overall, and it's applying those kind of concepts to everything. To me personally, I think the two things that are most important and central to it, that really kind of set it apart from what I would say classic DevOps, which is that you have your infrastructure as code, you have your Ansible or Puppet or pipelines that just do shell commands or whatever to deploy it. You might have, a dev team that writes the code, and then at some point it essentially gets thrown over a wall to where either operators or a platform system that knows how to deploy things take over and just throw it in the system. That's kind of the classic approach. What really makes it meaningful here, the focus on it, is that collaborate piece, where you have everything centric in like the manifest on Git. You make a merge request, everything's in there like exactly what you're getting. We are upgrading component A to version 2 and component B to version 3. This is all it. Release manager, do you approve? And then if they do it, after they've talked about, you could have preview environments and all the other fun things mixed in, But ultimately, there's going to be like a thumbs up, the thing merges, and then ideally, I would say a pull-based operator sees, hey, there's an update in the manifest repository. I'm going to go ahead and reconcile whatever I'm looking at, which gets into usually GitOps is applied to Kubernetes, but you can kind of jerry-rig it as you see fit and tweak at it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you need some sort of reconciliation loop that just goes there and makes it so. And the final thing that helps if you are doing the pull-based approach is a nice security facet where if you have an operator sitting in a cluster, that means the system that deals with your source code and builds and things like that, preview environments, dev test, does not need to have any sort of access to a production environment whatsoever. That's all just hanging out over here being run by the operator. So that's a nice extra. Those two things, what I would say would be the most important and unique things about GitOps versus the rest of DevOps and the classic way of doing things.
So, I mean, for me, as to why GitOps is important, and I'm going to go. I don't show it, you know, maybe a little bit of age here and there or something like that. But I'm going to talk about what I know from history and the painful times that I had when we were dealing with ye olde worldy and the way that these things operated, and that if we wanted to change something within the infrastructure, we would have 6-week lead times in order to get tin through the door. Then we would have implementation times, the times it takes to get something into a data center, get it wired up, get it connected, get it proved and tested. And in all of that time, while that's going on, the software that's actually going to sit, the applications that are going to sit on that are also evolving and changing. And you know, we've gone from a time where the time it took for an application to be delivered, it was more than enough time for the actual hardware to be put in place and to be implemented. But the speed and the rate within which we delivered applications and we delivered software and the way we incrementally changed that far overtook the infrastructure, the way that we were implementing the infrastructure. The result being that what you thought was the capacity that you required from your infrastructure for an application very quickly potentially became out of date as software, as applications came into place and they were used, and suddenly the demand for them was a lot greater. So the disk space that you thought you needed for your system, actually it was far too small, and you're quickly reaching your peak usage on the system. Or the amount of demand through, you know, the amount of network traffic that's required through there, the load that's coming in onto the system is just not appropriate. So GitOps for me was very much a response to that, you know, first through the world of virtualization, and then through the implementation of containers, and then through, you know, the changes into Kubernetes, into how we control whole farms and whole environments. It allows us to have that more rapid change. It allows us to keep pace on the infrastructure change alongside the application change. And then this for me is where there's that difference as to why GitLab is so important, because GitLab can provide you with that joined up collaboration between the infrastructure piece, between the application piece, and bring it all together into that single planning environment. So when you have that change that is going to impact, you know, it's going to impact, let's think the application, the software, and it's going to implement, change the infrastructure in some way, which might be as a result of customer request, or it might be as a result of an incident, a security issue. Then it's, you know, it's easier to manage in that more holistic way, to be able to plan that out, to get that feed, to understand what the impacts of those changes are, and to have the appropriate teams actually collaborating on there. So that for me is where there's an importance in there. It brings the infrastructure element into the loop of an entire development across the whole technology piece, which is something that's quite hot on within the DevOps world at the moment, in that a lot of people are questioning, well, DevOps was supposed to be about being more collaborative and getting rid of silo walls. So why are we still suffering with a problem with silo walls? Well, some silos are good, some silos are bad. It's understanding where we need to break down those appropriate silo walls in order to implement a change within there.
And I think a classic example for me, and I'm going to introduce you here in terms of that Kubernetes piece and how Kubernetes operates, is that sometimes those people operating in the Kubernetes world can often operate sometimes in a silo in their own right. And now they're being brought into the fold. They're able to collaborate more closely with other teams.
And we have a perfectly well-timed question on the topic, which is thought-provoking, because I think we can lead into another section on that, although we might end up staying on this little piece right here a little longer than expected. But Joe asks, are we talking about using a workflow/workload tool to drive GitOps? Which makes me think about, is GitOps part of the pipeline, the workflow, or something else? And this is interesting to me because there really are kind of like two worlds, two minds to that question. In the very, very original definition put together by Weaveworks, and also what you would see working with tools like Argo CD, the workflow part, the pipeline, that's all about your CI and building things and running automated tests, possibly dealing with preview environments or things that are not production. All those things just kind of happen. And they're part of the workflow, that's standard development. And then there's kind of this little teeny tiny piece at the end of that, which is something like Argo CD sitting in a Kubernetes cluster. And all it does is just like, hey, Git, are you in sync with me? No, okay. Are you in sync? Are you in sync? Are you in sync? Oh, that's a change. I'm going to reconciliate it. And that's kind of the teeny tiny version of GitOps. But for GitLab, it has, my understanding, kind of built more into the pipeline, especially because you actually have multiple flavors of GitOps within GitLab.
Yeah, exactly. And we're now getting into an area which is my absolute passion, and it's a very upcoming area, which is around value stream management. And it's about incorporating GitOps as part of a value stream. We're going beyond the point of just talking about workload and workflow and about pipelines. We're talking about these things being part of the delivery of a value stream. So when you're delivering value to a customer at the end, you are delivering all of that together, and you're doing it in the most efficient and effective way possible. One of the risks that obviously has been identified early on, if you've got these kinds of silos, is, right, I'm ready to deliver my code, but my infrastructure is not in place to allow me to actually deliver that code at this moment in time. That causes delays. That's a delay in getting the value to the end customer. And that's where having a joined up value stream that brings these teams together to operate and deliver in this way is extremely important, which is why you're going to see more and more about value stream management within the GitLab tool. So, we've introduced concepts such as the DORA metrics, which measures your mean time to recover. It measures your lead time. And these are things which are important aspects in how we deliver. So having GitOps within GitLab plugged into this entire value stream is extremely important, because otherwise you're missing a vital cog in the wheel in delivering that value to the end customer at the end of the day. Do you think we're ready to go on to the, is there more that you want to discuss there, Rasmus, or shall we move on and ask the next question?
We have a next question. I'm not sure if we might want to delay that a little bit and talk about value streams again later, so we can get through the next poll and on to the next slide first.
Yeah, in fact, actually, no, when we get on to the next slide, when we're talking about flow, we'll talk about that. So the DevOps first way, flow, feedback, and then experimentation. We can talk about that later. I'll mention that then. Poll question 2, and this comes back to, strangely, nice little flow here. It comes back to this value. What is the value? What is the benefit of GitOps that you are more interested in? So let's have a look at this. What is it that you're seeking to get out of GitOps? What is the value it's going to present to yourselves?
And of course, this gets tricky when you're not necessarily sure about what the features are of GitOps yet. But as noted in the poll, it's, security and collaboration is two of the, I would say, unique things to it, because it has facets to it that are new-ish, whereas, everything is code. you can achieve already with just kind of like infrastructure as code and so on. So that's not necessarily new. It's really kind of the process that you wrap around it, which is what GitOps really adds to the picture.
And there's an interesting aspect about the security as well. I don't want to be playing buzzword bingo here, but there's both a both a shift left and a shift right element to this. You know, there's that shift left element in terms of incorporating security, embedding security into the system as you are building it. So those GitOps operations of ensuring that you build security into your infrastructure as you are creating it. But then there's also that shift right of how do you react to a potential security issue when you have a breach, when you have an issue with potential data being exposed. How do you react to that? What are the operations you perform as part of your incident management to a security issue, to a SEV1 issue? And they're tied together, but they operate in slightly different ways. So it's going to be interesting as well around that side.
Yep. And one other option on the poll here is speed, which is another one of these. Well, yes, it can help you go faster, but that's not necessarily, in my mind, uniquely belonging to the GitOps aspect of things. A plain CD pipeline will help you go faster. That doesn't have to involve GitOps at all. And there are in fact cases. Now, I will admit this is one of the potential drawbacks to GitOps at some times, where it might get a little tricky, because if you have GitOps in the traditional way, where sort of like every component is its own repository, if you're trying to apply a bulk change to where you say like all 20 of these microservices need to update this one library by one version, you probably will actually need to do some automation that goes in there and bumps it in all the right places. And then you may end up with 20 merge requests that all just kind of like okay the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have that automated, it may seem like an overwhelming amount of added manual work to go approve those things, when you could probably just let it rip, commit, push everywhere, let the stuff handle it. And you can also kind of sneak in and say for those kind of things, okay, you know what, we will do GitOps, but we will accept these kinds of one-offs, which is like a simple library update as a low-risk thing. And rather than necessarily go through all the pull requests the standard way and collaborate and review things, there is much to do review on if it's the same thing in 20 places. So you might just kind of like change, do it in one place and say, okay, we're going to just push all 20 of these in one bulk action and be done with it. So there's some aspects you have to be careful about that may not actually increase speed.
Exactly. It's a common question that I've heard, about this concept of automate everything. It's when do you automate? How should you automate? When is it important to actually automate? And that comes again down to the value add. You should be automating activities that will improve your capability to actually deliver, which leads us nicely into the third element of the question that was asked around about flow and how that applies into the DevOps ways, into the 3 ways of DevOps. This is the GitOps flow. This is a typical example of a GitOps flow within there. And what you're seeing within here is that typical kind of arrangement of how things operate. Rasmus, do you want to talk everybody through this flow, just through the concepts, and then we'll just pick out some particular points within here. Some of these have been highlighted for us in terms of where that value add is, and we'll just go into those into a little more depth.
Sure, and this also brings an interesting point again to how the different flavors of GitOps will include different parts of this. The original definition by Weaveworks, when they coined GitOps in the first place, very, very distinctly said that CI is not part of GitOps. But when you have this big pipeline-y solution-y thing and you have sprinkles of GitOps on it, you can kind of say that it's part of the flow, because that still leads you to having these new artifacts that are ready for being shoved into a preview environment as part of the review app, and so on. So it really is a spectrum. But ultimately, it comes back down to somebody put some code somewhere, and creates a merge request. And then you can cycle, open the feature, fork on this little chart, and see, okay, your changes are being built. Here's all the testing, validation. You can get a review app. You can do the review, discuss, and ultimately approve it. So the original definition would suggest that it's actually at the moment you do the merge, it's actually where it gets GitOpsy, because that's when it is like, okay, there's an operator over here, the agent, in this case on this diagram, which sees what it's looking at, the master branch. Hey, there's an update. I need to reconciliate the environment I'm managing. And there is, I'm happy to say that while at first I was a little skeptical about GitLab's definition of GitOps, back when it was kind of like, GitOps is the next DevOps. It's like everything is awesome now. It was awesome before too, now it's awesomer. But back then it was actually based on the whole pipeline and push and so on. But there is a neat Kubernetes agent now, which I am a fan of, and maybe we'll get into a bit more detail on that later. But I want to leave it here with the overview on this so we can get back to the questions and so on.
Yeah, certainly. So I just want to ask the earlier question that was asked by Mark. The value stream represented is represented in the DevOps first way, end to end. Yes and no. It's not the complete thing. This is something I know that there's a lot of discussion about, but value stream management actually goes beyond the concept of DevOps that we know it today. So for those who are not aware, but I'm sure most of you are, the three ways of DevOps are flow, feedback, and it's about iterative experimentation. Now, the flow, you're seeing an example of that here. That's that GitOps flow from where there is a concept, whether that be an issue or whether that be a new request, a request for change, an idea, through to the point where that has actually been implemented. And within value stream management, there is that same concept of the flow from ideation through to realization. So when from the point where an idea has been placed to the point that that's actually realized, that value has been delivered. But there's also this concept of feedback, the second way. And you see an example of that feedback in here. It literally says that you're getting the feedback from the reconciliation, the infrastructure, or when the agent resolves drift, through to that creating an issue. That is feedback coming into the system. There's also feedback that's not necessarily shown on here, but is around that area around committing your changes. And when you're running your CI pipeline, because you're running tests on those areas, you're doing checks, you're doing quality inspections. So at that point, there's very rapid feedback that's coming into the system as well. And that is all part of delivering value, because value at the end of the day, you talk about value, people immediately think dollar signs, pound signs, yen, whatever currency it is that you're using. But value is more than that. Value is potentially about what is the quality of my system? What is the stability of the actual system? How many times a day are customers reporting that they're not being able to use that service? What is the customer journey time? How quickly can we get a change implemented into the system? These are also values that are important to your end user, to your end customer. So that feedback loop is just as important in making sure that there is quality in there. And that's reflected in DORA metrics, where you get the mean time to recover from, any kind of issue that you have within there. And then your final one as well, from that feedback I mentioned, you've got those quality checks. It's part of the experimentation. As you commit your changes, you're trying new things, you're getting very rapid feedback on whether they suit the need, whether they meet the best in terms of the value delivery that's within there. So all three elements of the three ways are part of value stream management. It's how you deliver that value within there. And bringing that back into GitOps, that is exactly the same thing within there, because, I'm going now into these orange boxes within here. These are typical examples of values. This is the value that you want to deliver. And this is the value that GitOps can deliver, which then gets into that world you were saying, Rasmus, of the difference between little GitOps, not to demean it, but very much more focused GitOps within that infrastructure world,
and that larger, more holistic view of GitOps in terms of how this fits into the overall flow of delivery of value, the overall feedback into my value, the overall experimentation in delivering that value. So it's about reduction in that mean time to recover, the low mean time to actually repair the systems, get the fixes out quicker. It's the faster time to value because of being able to inspect very quickly those changes that you've made within your infrastructure, how they've made improvements, what those improvements are, being able to quickly measure, compare, identify new routes, or to try multiple routes and to choose the one that provides the best capability. It's about that better collaboration that we mentioned earlier on. Applying a change or applying a fix to infrastructure is not necessarily standalone. You're potentially doing that in conjunction with changes to database structure, changes to the way you're operating within the system. Are you suddenly now load balancing your systems or not load balancing your systems? The amount of space that is actually required. Do I need to ramp up more instances within my cloud provider for these particular services? Do I need to ramp them down in order to reduce costs? And then it's also about that compliance. It's about that security aspect within there. Those approval of the changes might just be because your red team has found a potential exposure point, or it may be because of new regulatory or compliance changes that have come through that you need to rapidly get without there. Otherwise, you are exposing your business to risk and exposing it to high risk. So yes, value stream management plays an important part of this, but GitOps plays a very important part in value stream management and ensuring that you're delivering the entire thing within there. Rasmus, let's get into this Kubernetes thing. Let's get into this, right? I mean,
we will. I have one more thing.
Sorry, Kubernetes, I see it, I run a mile. I'm scared to death of it. Please talk us through it.
I will get to it, but first I kind of want to answer a hypothetical question that I imagine could be in the minds of our audience right now, or even for people wondering about GitOps in general. Because I can imagine people looking at this diagram and saying, okay, why is this GitOps? We're already doing this. We're already doing all these things. You could have let's call it classic DevOps approach, where you're using something like Puppet or Chef, where you have a central reconciliation, server, the brain that just kind of goes out and updates your inventory constantly, keeps it reconciled. And you could have this. This could already be exactly what you're doing, and you'd never heard about GitOps until now. So that's kind of how it goes, because there were plenty of people doing DevOps before DevOps was a coined term. And what DevOps kind of really brought to the table, I mean, now it's this amorphous blob of terms and technologies all mixed together that's changed over time. But when it really exploded and got on the market, the whole point of it was Dev meets Ops and breaking down those barriers and getting them closer together. You didn't necessarily change what you were doing, but you were changing how you were doing it. That's a similar situation with GitOps. So if you look at this thing and imagine for a moment you're running, kind of traditional DevOps where you have Puppet or Chef or something like that doing your CD, and you have you might be using pull requests and merge requests and so on. You might have them hooked into, say, SonarQube for an analysis and things. And whenever a pull request or merge request pops up, that tool runs automatically and says, hey, for the analytics, go see this thing over here. What I would say GitOps really adds and changes, much like how DevOps turned operations from being throw something over the wall with a ticket maybe and they'll take care of it, to where Ops started working as a service-oriented, team, where it's like, we prepare all these cool things, you just go hit the button and you get the thing. Like, yay. The same with GitOps is pull more and more of the action, the activity into your merge request phase, so that everything focuses around the merge request, so that all these results that come in from SonarQube or other tools actually get enriched into the merge request rather than just being links to all kinds of different tools and so on. So you literally had to start, everything is right there. The whole brain of the operations is that one merge request that has everything. So you can go in there, say you're a release manager and you're ready to go. Like, okay, yep, all this looks good. I can confidently, click the button and know that, things happen. So that was the collaboration rehash of why that's new in GitOps. And then the other bit, the side of security, is where the Kubernetes agent, for instance, come in, because in the olden days, both with, Chef or Puppet and early age GitLab, GitOps, it was all about push. When you're using Puppet or Chef, it's pushing out change. It's a master controller. It has access to everything. If your Puppet master gets compromised, well, whoever compromised it now owns all your infrastructure. Simple as that. And with GitLab, again, it's more spread out because it's so well organized in the hierarchy and different projects and so on. But it still gets back to, you have a change, okay, I need a credential to push the change out to some environments, and there you go. What changed, both with fundamental GitOps, back when it was just like, well, do your CI and whatever over here, blah, blah, blah. Ultimately, just make sure that there's a manifest, somebody merges a thing, and then there's a thing over here that actually goes and applies it to your infrastructure without having the access. That's the security, separation of duties of sorts to help make your environments more secure. The GitLab Kubernetes agent is sort of the latest, newest, coolest thing that really helps GitLab get and capture the spirit of original GitOps, because it moves to where you no longer need to feed GitLab the credentials to get into a Kubernetes cluster or something like that, because you originally set up these two agents. Actually, the setup works with putting a thin agent in your Kubernetes cluster, specifically so you don't need to update that thin agent all the time. If you're using something like Argo CD, you're actually maintaining an entirely different application, almost as sweet if you're using a lot of the Argo stuff that's living inside your cluster. Something needs to manage that, because it's its own whole thing, and you could manage that with GitOps, and then it's turtles all the way down. But if you just have the thin agent, which GitLab uses, it very, very rarely needs to be changed, and it can be enhanced to some degree automatically, because there's a thick agent, the second one, which runs on GitLab, either on the one in your public cloud, or if you have an on-prem instance, you actually have a little CAS thing that runs on your GitLab that knows how to talk to that agent. And they just kind of talk to each other. They maintain a connection, but it's still like the GitLab still can't touch your stuff directly, but it can kind of say, hey, thin agent over in the infrastructure, wherever you are, I have some new things for you. Next time you check here, just do the thing you do. And the little thin agent that sits over here in your Kubernetes cluster is not actually looking at your Git directly. It's looking at that little agent that says, hey, I've been checking these Git repos over here. There's some things ready for you. So whenever you please. And it just sits there and they go, oh, okay, new stuff, cool. I'm going to grab it and reconcile. So that's how the latest and greatest in GitLab works with Kubernetes. And that is what makes me happy now with GitLab and GitOps. Since I was a little like, that's not GitOps early on. So now I'm happier.
And there are two very important points actually that come from other pieces of literature that I've read lately, or I've been involved with lately. First of all is is what you mentioned around automation and the amount of time that is spent in the automation. Automation ultimately has to provide a value, but both in terms of speeding up processes, especially those where they are manual grind, where we're doing the same thing all the time, and we need to take that out of the system. And also in terms of improving quality, ensuring that there's repeatability in what we're doing and we're always performing the same thing at the same time. Now, that's great, providing the amount of time that you're spending on your automation tools is not just simply replacing the time that you were otherwise spending time doing things manually. Recent studies have shown within, I've seen several reports where you've got teams that are supposed to be developing code of spending 40% of their time actually tweaking and changing their automation tools and their automation processes. So as you say, with that Kubernetes agent, if that can be, if that is simplifying things, that is reducing the amount of workload and the amount of effort that is required on teams in terms of maintaining their automation processes, giving them more valuable time to actually do the things they're meant to be doing, creating and driving through that value. There's another important aspect that's come out of the 2022 GitLab DevSecOps survey that's come out, which is around the plethora of tools that we're getting out there. I recently discussed this at a DevOps Institute meeting where we presented some findings on there, and we showed about the number of organizations that had between 1 to 5 tools and the number that had between 6 to 10. And the response that came back was, well, why isn't that going up to 70? Because that's the number of tools that we're seeing some organizations have. Now, the problem is not necessarily in terms of their orchestration. There's orchestration tools out there which can drive those things through. GitLab can do that. But the problem is that you've got multiple data sources then for that information. There's multiple ways in which that information can be translated, and it can actually decrease collaboration within the actual tools because you're holding information in separate data repositories, separate data sets about the same change, about the same merge request that you're actually putting through. So consideration has to be given to how you're managing and mapping those tools and bringing those together, which comes back to that better collaboration piece, how you're bringing all of that together and merging all of that together. And that's true for your GitOps functions as well, because there are multiple environments that you're controlling within your GitOps. You need to ensure that you've got the proper controls and the proper information to hand for all of those. So I just thought I'd chip in with that one in there as well, around that side of things.
Yep, and I think we can almost about finish this slide. I will just leave one last kind of highlight in that if anybody is curious to more distinctly look at and understand the distinction between kind of like true GitOps, so the original take on it, and what GitLab, then I love Argo CD. It's a really good implementation of the original true GitOps. Even though Weaveworks also has their own thing, Flux. For a little while, it looked like they were going to merge, but that didn't happen. Argo seems to be kind of like the one that have run away with a lot of the market for the original true GitOps. And that's why they have this beautiful application that goes and lives in your cluster and, you know, does all kinds of neat things and really lets you do the whole, all the building and CI stuff is over here. That's whatever you do, DevOps, whatnot. And then there's like pure GitOps over here that just does CD with a pull-based, you know, security-centric thing. So Argo is a great thing to study on that topic. But then it really is interesting now to see how well GitLab has merged this beautiful pipeline that just covers everything, which is really like GitLab is all about the pipeline from just A to Z. And it's just the whole thing. And at first I can see how that was difficult to reconcile with GitOps, because it specifically is meant to sit over here somewhere out of the way and be disconnected from your main pipeline, because it's kind of its own thing. You can have, of course, some information that trickles back, like if you're observing through Prometheus or something with Kubernetes stats, you can get your own like dashboard, like where's all the stuff at? You know, in addition to Argo telling you if you want to see it somewhere else. But, you know, now that GitLab has the piece with the thin and thick agent that really kind of help you extend the pipeline, you actually are now standing to the point where you can have the pipeline and you can still have the standalone reconciliation agent that is secured and walled away from everything, but they're talking. You know, you kind of have your cake and eat it too. So that is a cool thing about how GitLab has approached GitOps at this point.
Yep, great. We'll move on to this third question. Poll question for you, the audience. How do you think you will approach GitOps over the next year or so? This may have been influenced by things that we've said, you know, maybe it's changed your consideration on some of these things, but just be interested to understand what is your approach, you know, what's potentially blocking you, what's holding you up, or have you got there? Are you where you need to be? So just please answer that poll. We'll have a look at the results in a moment or two. Whilst you're answering that poll, we touched a little bit on value stream management. It's not a concept it's not something to go into in depth in this discussion. It's not the appropriate place, but if anybody does want to understand more about that, please reach out. You can follow myself on LinkedIn, and I've got plenty of stuff that I'm going to be talking about. There's some interesting and really exciting stuff that we're developing in GitLab in this area. So if you want to know more, please reach out to me on LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn, go to our web pages. You can see more information there, and I'm happy to discuss with you. And Rasmus, in terms of yourself, what's going on in your world at the moment?
Not a whole lot of work, being that I'm moving in a month and it's just an absolute madhouse. So I have done some cool things with GitOps in the past that I would love to get back to one day, because it is such a broad concept. Like this poll is almost a cheat, because depending on how you define GitOps, you're doing it already. So of course everybody's doing it to some degree. And one of the nerdy ways that I approached it in the past was that GitOps, when it came out, was really centric to Kubernetes. And there are valid, counterpoints to that. There was a cool article recently about how the GitOps emperor may be wearing no clothes, that was getting in and really kind of picking at some of these advantages, because Kubernetes already has a reconciliation system and so on. So, okay, yeah. But, and this happened a lot. I was over at KubeCon in San Diego that's got to be more than 3 years ago. It was pre-pandemic. And there was a session on, GitOps. And one of the main questions that came up was, I'm not in Kubernetes. How can I benefit from GitOps if I can't do like Argo CD and all these cool things? Because I want in, but we can't move. There's so many, enterprises out there that have, a particular set of momentum in one direction, or they have a lot of legacy that they just can't update with it. So one nerdy thing I was, well, you can really make GitOps out of anything you want if you just add a little creativity. So I put together, because I'm a fan of Jenkins, and I just started saying, I have a Jenkins over here that does builds. I have a Jenkins over here that does GitOps. And it was just Jenkins reading out of, manifest type things in Git, and using old-fashioned Jenkins pipeline to run old-fashioned CD steps. But it was an isolated Jenkins, which essentially meant it might as well be sitting inside your infrastructure and nobody could get to it. They could just observe what it did. They couldn't like do things. So it's kind of like GitOps for the rest of us. So I would love to get back on that.
The results have come through, and it's interesting to see, almost half saying that they will probably proceed at their own pace with some level of adoption. I would actually endorse that. I would endorse that in terms of any kind of implementation. I mean, it's part of GitLab's values, the I for iteration, having an iterative approach to these responses, and, an iterative approach as to how you apply all of these things. But my one, the big takeaway I would give to you out of this, and hopefully you will take away from this, is to not look at GitOps purely in isolation, to understand that GitOps implementation is part of a bigger picture development. It's part of a bigger value stream in terms of what you are actually delivering. So consider carefully about how you are implementing GitOps in terms of collaboration with other aspects and other areas and other teams, because that also has to go the other way, because your GitOps teams, your GitOps operations also have to work in tandem with other changes and things that are coming through on your system. And that would be my big takeaway for you in this, is to, yes, GitOps is important, but it's important as part of a whole bigger picture, a whole bigger piece. Rasmus, yourself, anything that you want to take from that?
So I like these polls sometimes, because I'm thinking a well-designed poll almost answers itself. It just serves as kind of like a discussion piece. It's almost kind of like, if the FBI is asking you questions, they already know the answers, but they're curious about how you will answer it. So, this makes sense. I mean, there's interest in it, but at the same time, it's kind of like, well, I mean, we gotta just do it when we can get to it, or as the budget priority is a little higher than it's like the second highest option in here. Which, like, yeah, because there's often so many cool things, but there's just not either the budget or time or the really just pushing to go there. So yeah, the questions here make perfect sense to me, and I would say that, yeah, by all means, just take it easy and look out at all the different resources on the web to learn more about it when you can.
Absolutely. At this point, we're going to open it up to our audience. We've had some great questions during the actual talk, but if there's anything else that you would like to ask, please go into the Q&A section of the Zoom. You'll find that either up or below, wherever your particular bar is, and please type away your question. We have one here, Rasmus. I think this is a great one for you to answer. What is the estimated percentage of Kubernetes teams using Argo CD?
It would be a great question if my brain wasn't just Swiss cheese these days with all the stuff that's going on, because I'm pretty sure I have run across this, or an attempt at answering this percentage in the past, but at this point I can't remember. And it gets a little bit tricky again, because Kubernetes teams and Argo CD, I mean, you can use Kubernetes and it's just like a bucket of compute over here and magic happens and you have no idea how it happens, because you're using some internal platform that just says, put some files over here, magic happens, here's your environment. Are those teams like using Argo CD? Does it count that just like their ops team is using it, but they have like a dozen dev teams that are all benefiting from it? So I would say that for people engaged in GitOps in kind of like the true-ish way, I would say the percentage of them using Argo CD is going to be perhaps even dramatically high, because I would say Argo is the #1 GitOps provider out there. I'm going to expect that Flux is kind of like a little below it, but the two of them are really the big players in GitOps. Then there's a bunch of vendors that want to get in on it, and weirdos like me that make their own, like Hobo GitOps, and they're floating around out there, all just getting like small, probably single-digit percentages. But while I can make a guesstimate at that, just because of what I have run across on the web in context of GitOps, teams using Kubernetes overall, and then like how many of them are using Argo, there I would suspect it's probably really low, but it may still be a substantial player. But there's going to be so much Kubernetes out there that's being run doing all kinds of platforms, be it big giant things like Cloud Foundry, or the thing Mirantis is doing with Docker, or Rancher, all these things, which is K8s, but it's not Argo. There's so many options for playing Kubernetes that it's a gigantic ocean of things.
And just a little follow on from my own, you mentioned there in terms of those platforms, in terms of the flavor of Kubernetes that's being used. Are you seeing any kind of distinct direction in this? Is there a particular flavor that people are enjoying more? Or is it a case of not many people have Rocky Road, but everybody enjoys it?
We have seen a lot of different things just as a consultancy, since we encounter so many, different ones. But I don't know if I would say that any one thing is kind of like winning. I will say that personally, I would say GKE, Google's Kubernetes is just like the bee's knees. It is ridiculous. It is awesome. They have all kinds of cool things in there. And that would make sense because, Google kind of brought Kubernetes to the picture of things. So they're central to it. And they have a beautiful, wonderful system that works awesomely. But because Google Cloud's adoption rate itself is a little on the small side for some reason, I love it. I don't get it. I keep, suggesting it, but I guess Google just isn't necessarily great at marketing. Whereas AWS has the momentum. They're the gorilla in the room. They wrote EKS, and honestly, to begin with, it was awful. And I still can't get through it, but we're getting to where you have tools that will set up EKS for you. And then it's like, well, okay, I have my Kubernetes. I don't really care that it's EKS. It's just there. It's Kubernetes. Great. So there are so many things out there. Rancher, for instance, is a really awesome way of getting into Kubernetes and making it easy. If you want more like cross-cloud and managed complexity, there's Crossplane, which essentially lets you bring the concept of Kubernetes to Kubernetes. There we go with turtles all the way down again, because you actually have your Kubernetes clusters defined in YAML that's being processed by Kubernetes and deployed to Kubernetes or cloud providers and so on. It gets crazy. There's just so much awesome, cool Kubernetes out there that it's really just put a query into Google and prepare to spend a week just reading about cool things if you have the time for it.
Yeah, and I will just say that GitLab, irrespective of your flavor of Kubernetes, GitLab will be there to actually support your capabilities there. Totally agnostic when it comes to that kind of thing. We're there for you. We're there for you.
I will say that also I did enjoy how well GitLab integrated the concept of environments with Kubernetes and so on, because that's the thing that's often missing, sort of in between the automation of CI/CD and your compute. The metadata often goes missing, like which environments do you have, what's in the environments, and all those kind of things. I've done, handcrafted automation on wiki pages that just get updated by the automation and the compute to just kind of keep that visible. And I like some of the options that GitLab has there to help automate that.
Yeah. No, that's great. Fantastic. I think we are almost at the end of time. Just a quick mention that the slides themselves will be sent out to all of you along with the recording. Those of you who've attended today, I hope that you found this interesting and informative. I always say, if you come away from something having learned at least one new thing, then it's not been a waste of time. Even if it's just that you've learned that I'm here and Rasmus is here, and that you can reach out to us at any time, and if you want to discuss more and discuss further. At which point, Vanessa, is there anything more that needs to be added at that point?
I don't think so. I think I just want to say thank you for both of you for hosting this and going through everything. It was really informative, and I hope everybody on the call found it as informative as I have. Any other questions, feel free to contact these guys. I will be sending out the recording and the slides anyway, so you can drop us an email back or contact one of our team to find out more. So yeah, thank you again, guys, for hosting, and thank you for everyone attending.
Good stuff.